In 2018, my family moved into an old colonial house in Black Hollow, Vermont. What I'm about to share is a true story. I've hesitated for years before speaking about it publicly because it sounds like something pulled straight out of folklore. But everything I'm about to say happened exactly as I remember it. If you've ever moved into a house that felt aware, then you'll understand what I mean. We didn't find the spider. The spider was already waiting for us. My name is Ilara Whitcomb. In the summer of 2018, my husband Corvin Hale and I bought a 19th century property on the northern edge of Black Hollow. It was a quiet Vermont town surrounded by dense woods and fields that seemed to stretch endlessly into tree lines that swallowed the sky at dusk. The house was beautiful in a tired, fragile way. White paint peeling, tall windows, an attic that arched like the inside of a cathedral ceiling. The realtor mentioned it had been empty for nearly 4 years. I remember the first time I stepped inside. The air was stale but not rotten. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt occupied. Not by movement. Not by sound. Just by presence. Corvin laughed at me when I said that. He always believed old houses just carried drafts and imagination. We had 2 children at the time, our daughter, Malin, who was 8, and our son, Thorn, who had just turned 5. The first 2 weeks were normal. Unpacking boxes, repainting rooms, learning which floorboards creaked. At night, though, the woods were louder than expected. There was this low rustling that never quite sounded like wind. One evening, Malin asked if we had pets in the attic. I told her no. She said she heard something, walking very carefully. That was the first time I went up there. The attic stairs were narrow and steep. When I pushed open the hatch, dust rained down in a soft cloud. The bulb flickered when I pulled the string. And that's when I saw it. It was positioned in the far corner, between 2 heavy support beams. The spider. I had seen large spiders before. This was something else. Its body alone was the size of my palm, and its legs stretched outward in long, deliberate arcs. The web around it wasn't messy. It was structured, layered, almost architectural. It covered nearly the entire corner of the attic wall like a woven curtain. But what disturbed me wasn't the size. It was how still it was. It wasn't hiding. It wasn't scurrying. It was simply there, centered in its web, facing outward, as if it had been expecting someone to come look at it. I froze. I remember whispering, "Oh my God!" And then something stranger happened. It didn't move toward me. It didn't retreat. It just shifted one leg, slowly, almost adjusting its posture. I stepped back instinctively. My heart was racing, but I couldn't look away. There was something ancient about it. Something deeply wrong. That night, I told Corvin about it. He rolled his eyes and said he'd remove it the next day. The next morning, our neighbor, Alistair Rookwood, stopped by with a basket of apples from his orchard. He was in his late 60s, thin, sharp-featured, with a voice that always sounded like he knew more than he was saying. We mentioned the spider casually, joking about needing industrial-sized bug spray. Alistair didn't laugh. Instead, his face drained of color. "You didn't disturb it, did you?" he asked. Corvin frowned. "It's just a spider." Alistair shook his head slowly. "You leave that one alone." The way he said it made the air feel heavier. I tried to lighten the mood. "Why?" He looked past us, toward the tree line behind our house. "Because it's not there to keep things in." There was a long silence. "It's there," he said quietly, "to keep something out." I felt a coldness slide down my spine. Corvin chuckled nervously. "That's some town folklore, I'm guessing." Alistair nodded once. "Yes," he said. "Folklore." But his eyes didn't match his tone. That night, the woods were louder. Not rustling. Breathing. And at exactly 2:17 a.m., Every single light in our house flickered at once. Malin started screaming from her bedroom. When we rushed in, she was sitting upright, pointing at her window. "There's someone in the trees," she whispered. I looked outside, and for just a second, between the trunks, I saw something move. It wasn't shaped right. Too tall, too narrow, and then it was gone. The next morning, I went back up to the attic. The spider hadn't moved from its web, but something new was caught in it. Not an insect, not debris. It looked like a piece of bark, dark, wet, and faintly twitching. I remember thinking one thing very clearly in that moment. Whatever was outside last night, it hadn't gotten inside, and somehow, deep down, I knew why. I didn't tell Corvin about what I'd seen in the web. Not immediately. I just stood there in the attic, staring at that dark, bark-like shape tangled in silk. The spider remained motionless in the center of its web, its legs curved inward slightly, as if guarding what it had captured. The thing stuck in the strands wasn't shaped like any insect I'd ever seen. It was elongated, uneven, almost like a strip torn from a tree trunk. But bark doesn't twitch. This did. Not violently. Not enough to shake the web. Just enough to make my stomach turn. I took one cautious step closer. The air felt thick up there, warmer than the rest of the house. My ears rang faintly, like pressure building before a storm. The spider slowly adjusted its position. One leg extended outward, deliberate and precise, touching the trapped shape. And the twitching stopped. Completely. It wasn't a random movement. It was controlled. Intentional. Like it knew I was watching. I backed away and left the attic without touching anything. Downstairs, the house felt calmer, quieter. The children were eating breakfast as if nothing had happened. Corvin was reading emails at the kitchen table. Sunlight came through the windows, soft and ordinary. I almost convinced myself it had been my imagination. Until that evening. Around dusk, our dog, an old shepherd mix named Briar, began growling at the back door. Not barking. Growling low and continuous, the way animals do when they sense something they can't process. The woods beyond the yard were darker than usual. The tree line looked thicker somehow. Dense. Compressed. Then Briar yelped. Not because something attacked him. Because something answered. From the woods came a sound I can only describe as wooden joints bending. A dry, splintering creak, layered with something wet beneath it. It moved from left to right, slowly, parallel to our property line, staying just beyond the fence. Corvin stepped onto the porch with a flashlight, sweeping it across the trees. The beam caught trunks, branches, leaves. And then, for a fraction of a second, it caught something that wasn't a tree. It stood too straight. Its surface looked textured, ridged, almost like bark. But it wasn't rooted to the ground. The light passed over it, and it was gone. Corvin lowered the flashlight slowly. "Probably a deer," he muttered. "But deer don't stand 7 feet tall without a head shape." That night, none of us slept well. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the house lights flickered again. This time, I was awake. I heard something scrape along the outside wall beneath our bedroom window. A slow drag, like wood against wood. I forced myself not to look, because I didn't want it to know I was aware of it. In the morning, I checked the siding outside. For long grooves ran across the wood. They weren't claw marks. They were too smooth, too even. Like something had pressed itself against the house and leaned its weight there. I drove into town that afternoon and found Alistair Rookwood sitting outside the general store. He looked as though he'd been expecting me. "It's walking the boundary, isn't it?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He nodded once. "It tests the line every few years," he continued. especially when new blood moves in. My throat tightened. What is it? Alistair didn't say the name. He just looked toward the forested hills surrounding Black Hollow. Older than the town, he said. Older than the houses. The first settlers wrote about it in journals. They thought it was a spirit of the forest. Something that mimicked trees. Something that leaned close to homes at night. I felt my hands trembling. And the spider? I asked. He finally looked at me directly. That house was built with an understanding. The word sat heavily between us. An agreement, he said. I swallowed. Between who? Between the people who built it and what already lived there. A cold realization crept into my chest. You're saying the spider is part of that? He nodded slowly. It anchors the boundary. As long as it remains undisturbed, the line holds. I stared at him. And if it's killed? Alistair didn't answer immediately. Instead, he said something that still echoes in my head. Do you know why it stays in the attic? I shook my head. Because that's the highest point in the house. The closest place to the trees. The implication settled like ice in my lungs. That evening, Corvin came home with a ladder and a can of industrial pesticide. I'm not letting some oversized bug run this house, he said firmly. I felt panic rise in my chest. Corvin, don't. He paused. You actually believe that, old man? I didn't know what I believed. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever was in those woods had not crossed into our home. And something in the attic had stopped it. That night, around midnight, the dog began growling again. Only this time, the growling wasn't aimed at the back door. It was aimed at the ceiling, right above us. From the attic, I heard a faint vibration. Not scuttling, not scratching. A steady, rhythmic tension in the beams. Like silk being pulled tighter. And outside, in the trees, something let out a long, splintering creak of frustration. It didn't sound angry. It sounded denied. The next morning, the house felt different. Not louder. Not colder. Just watchful. Corvin barely spoke during breakfast. The can of pesticide sat on the kitchen counter like a silent decision already made. I could see it in his jaw, the way it tightened every time a floorboard creaked overhead. He didn't like not being in control. And something about the idea of an agreement made him feel small. Around noon, while the kids were playing outside, he picked up the ladder. I'm ending this today, he said. I stepped in front of the attic door. Corvin, please. Just give it a few more days. A few more days for what? For that thing to grow bigger. It hasn't hurt us. He looked at me sharply. You don't know that. But I did know something. In 3 nights of whatever had been circling our home, nothing had crossed the threshold. Not a window. Not a door. Not even the crawl space beneath the porch. Something was holding a line. And it wasn't us. Before I could argue further, Malin screamed from the backyard. We both ran outside. She was standing near the tree line, frozen in place, pointing into the woods. It's closer, she whispered. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed the trees weren't aligned the way they had been before. One trunk leaned slightly forward. 2 forward. It wasn't rooted. It was standing on the forest floor. Its bark shifted subtly, like layered plates adjusting over muscle. It was taller than I remembered. Its surface was dark, damp-looking, with ridges that pulsed faintly, as if something beneath them was breathing. Corvin stepped in front of the children instinctively. The thing didn't rush us. It didn't lunge. It simply leaned, closer to the invisible boundary between woods and yard. The air grew heavy. Briar began whining behind us. Then I felt it, an almost imperceptible pressure above my head. I glanced up at the roof, and for a split second, I saw the faintest shimmer stretching from the attic peak outward toward the trees, like threads catching sunlight. The spider's web, not just inside the attic, but extending, impossibly, beyond it. The leaning figure in the woods made a sound, a dry, splintering groan, and then it stepped back. Not quickly, not in fear, in recognition. The pressure lifted instantly. The forest returned to stillness. Corvin stood frozen long after it retreated. That evening, he didn't touch the pesticide, but he didn't throw it away either. At 2:17 a.m., the lights flickered again. This time, I was already sitting up in bed, waiting. The house groaned softly, not from age, but from tension. Then came the sound, not from the woods, from the roof. A slow drag across the shingles. Corvin bolted upright. It's on the house. We both knew it. The weight above us shifted carefully, deliberately, testing. A long, splintering scrape moved toward the attic peak, toward the spider. And then, silence. A stillness so complete it pressed against my ears, followed by a violent tremor through the ceiling beams. The entire house shook once, sharply, as if something heavy had slammed into an invisible wall. Malin began crying in her room. Thorn called out my name. From above us came a sound I will never forget. Not a hiss, not a screech. A deep, resonant vibration, like thousands of silk strands tightening at once. Then a crack, like bark splitting under pressure. Something slid down the roof. Not falling, recoiling. Outside, in the woods, a furious splintering roar echoed through the trees. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something ancient being denied again. The lights steadied. The house settled. And then everything went quiet. Too quiet. We didn't sleep at all after that. At sunrise, I climbed into the attic alone. The air was thick and warm again. The spider remained at the center of its web. But it had changed. Its legs were spread wider now, anchored firmly to the beams. And tangled in the silk, far more than before, were dark fragments. Splintered pieces of something that looked like tree bark. Except these pieces bled a thick, black sap that dripped slowly onto the attic floor. I stared at the damage. The spider had fought. And it had won. But the web was strained. One section near the peak beam sagged slightly, thread stretched thin. The boundary wasn't unbreakable. It was being tested. And I realized something terrifying in that moment. This wasn't a one-time encounter. This was an ongoing negotiation. An agreement that required maintenance. And for the first time, the spider turned fully toward me. All 8 eyes reflecting the dim attic light. Not aggressive. Not afraid. Expectant. As if waiting to see whether we would honor the agreement. Or break it. After that night, I couldn't pretend we were just passive witnesses anymore. Something had attacked our home. And something inside our home had defended it. The next morning, I told Corvin everything I had seen in the attic. The black sap, the strained web, the way the spider had turned toward me. For the first time since we moved in, he didn't argue. He just listened. Then he said something that unsettled me more than disbelief ever could. If it's holding something back, he said quietly, what happens when it can't anymore? That question hung in the kitchen like smoke. By afternoon, the woods felt closer. Not physically closer, but present. The wind had died completely, yet the tree line shifted faintly, as if something tall was moving between trunks without disturbing leaves. Briar refused to step beyond the porch. Even the children stayed near the house without being told. Around sunset, Alistair Rookwood came again. This time, he didn't bring apples. He carried a small wooden box carved with old, shallow markings. They weren't decorative. They looked practical, intentional. "You saw it on the roof," he said without greeting. I nodded. He glanced up at the attic window. "It's getting bolder." Corvin folded his arms. "Why our house?" Alistair sighed. "Because yours still keeps the old terms." He opened the wooden box. Inside were small objects, dried herbs, iron nails bound together with twine, and something wrapped carefully in cloth. "The original owners weren't foolish," he continued. "They understood the boundary wasn't permanent. It needs reinforcement." My mouth went dry. "Reinforcement how?" He looked at me, not Corvin. "It must be fed." The word felt wrong. "Fed what?" Corvin demanded. "Not flesh," Alistair said quickly. "Not blood." That superstition layered over fear. He unwrapped the cloth. Inside were small, brittle husks, shed spider exoskeletons. Old ones. "Protection requires recognition," he said. "You don't kill the guardian. You strengthen its place." That night, under Alistair's guidance, we climbed into the attic together. The spider did not move as we entered. It remained centered, vast and still. But the air pulsed faintly, like a held breath. Alistair instructed us to press the iron nails into the 4 beams that formed the attic's highest point. 1 at each corner. "Ground the line," he murmured. Then he placed the old husks gently at the base of the web. The spider shifted. Slowly. One leg extended downward and touched the offering. The web vibrated softly. A low hum filled the attic, not audible exactly, but felt in the bones. The strained section near the peak beam tightened slightly. Not fully repaired, but stronger. We left without speaking. At 2:17 a.m., the lights flickered again. But this time, something different happened. Instead of pressure from outside, I felt a pulling sensation upward, like tension drawing toward the attic. The woods erupted in movement. Branches snapped. Leaves thrashed violently, though there was no wind. Through the bedroom window, I saw it clearly for the first time. The entity stepped fully out of the tree line. It was tall, easily 8 feet now, its body composed of layered bark-like plates that shifted over something darker beneath. Its limbs bent too smoothly to be wood, and where a face should have been, there was only a vertical split that opened slightly, revealing blackness within. It approached the house boundary, and stopped. A faint shimmer stretched from the roofline outward again, like thousands of invisible threads woven into the night. The entity leaned forward. The split in its face widened. From it came a sound, low and grinding, like trees being uprooted in slow motion. Then it pressed against the boundary. The entire house shuddered. Up in the attic, something answered. A violent, resonant vibration shook the beams. Dust rained from the ceiling. I heard the spider move. Not a scuttle. Not panic. Purpose. The web thrummed with tension so strong it made my teeth ache. Outside, the entity recoiled as if burned. Black sap-like fluid dripped from its bark plates onto the grass. It didn't retreat immediately. It circled, searching, testing another angle. And then, horrifyingly, it began moving toward the side of the house where the attic web sagged slightly. The weak point. My heart stopped. The shimmer flickered there. Dimmer. The entity raised one elongated limb and pressed. For a second, the boundary thinned. The air inside the house dropped 10 degrees instantly. The lights burst off completely. Total darkness. From above, I heard something tear. Not wood. Not fabric. Silk. I ran toward the attic stairs without thinking. Corvin shouted my name, but I was already climbing. When I pushed open the hatch, the attic was lit only by moonlight through the small window. The web was vibrating violently. One entire section had split, and through that split, A thin, bark-textured limb was forcing its way inward. The entity had found the fracture. The spider lunged, faster than anything that size should be capable of. Its legs wrapped around the intruding limb instantly, anchoring into it. The bark surface cracked under pressure, revealing that dark, wet interior. The entity let out a sound that made the entire attic rattle. The limb thrashed, splintering beams, tearing more silk. The spider tightened, and then it bit, right at the seam where bark met darkness. A thick spray of black fluid coated the web. The limb convulsed violently, and then it withdrew, ripping free. The broken section of web collapsed partially, hanging loose. The entity outside staggered backward, its form flickering between solid and something almost shadow-like. It retreated to the tree line, but it did not disappear. It stood there, watching, waiting, and in the attic, the spider remained poised, 2 legs missing, one cracked near the joint, but still centered, still guarding. I realized then something even more terrifying than the entity itself. The agreement wasn't symbolic. It was active, and it was costing something to maintain. After the attack on the attic, nothing felt stable anymore. The house stood. The boundary held. But it had been breached. The next morning, the attic smelled faintly metallic, mixed with that strange sap-like odor. The torn section of web hung like a wounded curtain. 2 of the spider's legs were gone completely, severed during the struggle. One more was bent unnaturally, and yet it still held its place in the center. Alive. Watching. The dark fragments caught in the web no longer twitched. They had hardened into brittle bark-like shards that crumbled if they dropped to the floor. Corvin stood beside me quietly. "I was wrong," he said finally. It was the first time he admitted it. We called Alistair immediately. When he arrived and saw the damage, his expression hardened in a way I hadn't seen before. "It's never pushed this far," he murmured. "Can it heal?" I asked. He hesitated. "It can mend the web," he said. "But only if the household acknowledges the bond." That word again. Bond. He explained that long ago, families who lived on the forest's edge understood something simple. Survival wasn't about dominance. It was about coexistence. The spider wasn't a pet. It wasn't a curse. It was a guardian placed, allowed, at the highest point of the home. In return, the house was never to reject it, never poison it, never dismantle its web. And when it was injured, the family had to repair the space around it, strengthen beams, maintain structure, keep the boundary intact. Because if the spider fell, the line would fall with it. That evening, we worked for hours in the attic. Corvin reinforced the cracked beams. I carefully removed broken wood splinters without disturbing the web further. Alistair placed more iron nails at measured points, forming a subtle grid within the attic's frame. The children stayed downstairs, unusually quiet. As the sun set, the spider shifted slowly. One remaining leg extended toward a newly secured beam. The web tightened slightly, not fully restored, but stabilizing. That night, 2:17 a.m. came again. The lights flickered. We waited. The woods erupted once more, but this time the sound was different. Not testing, not circling, raging. Through the bedroom window, I saw the entity step forward again. It was damaged now. One of its limbs hung fractured, leaking black fluid onto the forest floor. It moved to the boundary and struck it violently. The shimmer flared bright. The house trembled, but it did not break. Up in the attic, the web resonated powerfully. Even from below, I could feel the vibration through the walls. The entity struck again, and again, each impact weaker than the last. Finally, it leaned forward one last time. The vertical split in its bark face opened wide, revealing only depthless darkness inside. And then, it stepped back. Slowly, not defeated, but recognizing something unchangeable. It turned and walked into the woods. This time, the trees did not shift to hide it. They stood still, and it vanished between them. The woods have been quiet ever since. No more breathing sounds. No more dragging across the roof. No more flickering at 2:17 a.m. The spider still lives in our attic. It has regrown 2 legs, smaller than before, but functional. The web remains vast and carefully layered. Sometimes I go up there just to stand quietly. It no longer feels threatening. It feels necessary. We never speak of it to newcomers in town. And when someone jokes about clearing out attic pests, I feel a chill that has nothing to do with memory. Because I know something they don't. Some houses don't stay safe because of locks. They stay safe because of agreements. And agreements, once broken, don't always offer a second chance. This happened in 2018, in Black Hollow, Vermont. A true story. And if you ever move into an old house near the woods, and you find something ancient already living in the highest corner, you might want to consider why it's there before you decide to remove it. If this story unsettled you even a little, that means you felt what we felt. Sometimes protection doesn't look comforting. Sometimes it doesn't look safe. But not everything frightening is your enemy. If you've ever experienced something unexplainable in an old house, or felt like your home was protecting you from something unseen, share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoy true horror stories like this, and subscribe for more real, psychological, and supernatural experiences. And if you know someone who loves dark, unsettling true stories, share this with them. You never know who might already have something waiting in their attic.